just to kind of give some context to this, I know Simon and Leah joined in. Some of you be aware, I was putting together a secular program on well-being, which actually is now been accredited. So now I can offer it and you get CPD hours and so on. But I always used to say, well, a lot of what we're doing here is just that using the secular language, the language of science and psychology, to explain things that are actually a very biblical way of life. And it's a kind of one of my, so there's a real good opportunity if you're wired in a certain way, and I'd really encourage you to think about this, which is probably the best opportunity for kind of Christian pastoral work for those who aren't believers, actually is in the area of well-beings and sort of psychological development, because modern science is increasingly explaining to us perhaps why the Lord told us to do certain things. So that it no longer is just a rule that you ought to do. You start to realize why it's good for you. And so actually tonight, as we're looking at it, we're going to look at some of the similar material. So Simon and Leah, you would have seen some of this, but we'll look at it from a slightly more biblical kind of perspective. But for most of you, the thing that will be missing sometimes is either the connection to, if you like, the secular science language, or just even knowing some of it at all. So actually there will be an emphasis there, but hopefully from a framework where we're seeing how actually these are the things that the Bible tells us. And you know, I'm starting off with this kind of initial title: "A happy heart is good medicine." Because quite literally, although we anecdotally have understood that happy people tend to be healthier, they're mentally healthier, they're physically healthier, and so on, we're starting to understand the science of that a lot more, and it kind of adds nuance to the verses. So a happy heart really is good medicine. And we're going to look a little bit and discover that happiness is something that is quite a broad word, but Scripture talks to in loads and loads of different ways. And as we understand that, we can actually become much more disciplined in making happiness a part of our faith. I think it was G.K. Chesterton who once observed that if you meet a saint without humour, it's cause for concern. And actually, it was his observation, and it's one I think I've found to be genuinely true as well, that while there are verses in the Bible that talk about better to go to the house of mourning, actually what you find is those who've got the full spectrum of emotional experiences, rather than all one thing or another. And so Scripture often balances. There's a time to mourn, but there's also a time to laugh. There is an underlying kind of perspective, which we're going to see, that goes with happiness, which actually should be our foundational experience. So anyway, let's kind of work through. I've got to remind myself to stay on target, because I've called it the Happy Heart Hour in great faith. But that's what we're going to do tonight. Now, why is there we go. Yeah. So this list I kind of picked up from a modern website. You can actually extend this list, but these are all scientifically proven benefits of happiness. It improves your heart health, improves your stress resilience, and that's a real kind of key at the moment, because there are things that are going on in the lockdown that actually make you more sensitive to stress. So actually you want to counterbalance that if you can. It improves your immune system. So actually, in a very real sense, I don't know, we probably won't do it in great detail tonight, but even diseases like cancer, actually you can show are related to underlying levels of happiness. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you get cancer because you're not happy, but what you're saying is if you are happy, you actually produce hormones that suppress inflammation in certain areas, and sometimes it's inflammation in the tissue that's one of the causes of certain types of cancer, for instance. So even kind of health issues that you think would have nothing to do with the fact that you laugh a lot, and they really can have an impact. So you have a stronger immune system. I put correlation or causation here. People who are happy tend to develop healthier lifestyles. So there's a kind of, is that because they're happy, or is it because they have healthier lifestyles they are happy? And it's a bit of a push or pull, but actually it's important to recognize that actually community activities and so on, and getting out of our homes and enjoying the sunlight and those kind of healthier lifestyle things, they go very closely with those levels of happiness. Reduced pain, which is very real. It's not just psychological. Well, it is psychological, but it's very real. It's very real psychology. And you live longer as well. So just throwing those in there. And what's really interesting, of course, is that Jesus frames his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, with 8 happies. We call them the Beatitudes. And if you've got an older translation, it refers to them as being blessed is he, but you know them. Modern translations often put happy are those, because actually the word stretches across both. It's actually about being in a continuous place of well-being or happiness. So Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount starts with some unusual happies. Happy are the poor in spirit, happy are those who mourn. He said that doesn't make sense. But actually it's part of the challenge, I think, that Jesus is showing us that happiness isn't always what we think it is. And we're going to explore that a little bit tonight. That actually there's no contradiction between the idea of being poor in spirit and yet being happy. About actually being in a place of mourning and yet being happy. That's what I was saying at the beginning. Scripture tells us a happy heart's good medicine, but it also says it's not bad to mourn. It's good to mourn sometimes. Blessed are those who, blessed are the meek. They can be happy too. The righteous can be happy. Those who hunger for righteousness, they can also be happy. These are really challenges, is one way of looking at it, because there's a way of doing kind of, if you like, pursuit of virtue that can actually make you very unhappy. The way I often put it is when Jesus gives us a phrase like he says, you know the truth and the truth will set you free, he's given us a criteria to know whether the truth we're pursuing is useful truth or not. Is it liberating or is it miserable? And unfortunately, sometimes even as Christians, and I was going to say, we have so much written into the performance of our faith. And when I say the performance, what I don't mean is I won at this. I mean, just in the practice of it, that if we do them properly, should make us happy. But often we can twist them slightly, and that's where we start to get religious. And the reality is in most churches and most lives, we have a kind of a tension between the two. And so thinking about what we learn from the secular world about the way happiness is really good for us can help us understand and qualify some of these things a little bit. So it's quite possible, if you want to seek virtue signaling all over the place and not be happy at all. But there is a way of pursuing righteousness, being hungry for it, that can actually be very liberating and releasing. But happy are the merciful, happy are the pure in heart, happy are the peacemakers, happy are the persecuted righteous. So I'm not going to do a thing on the Beatitudes tonight. The Beatitudes is one of my favorite bits of Jesus' teaching, and I can quite happily spend about 8 hours. Well, I have done several whole days of teaching on this in London, so I'm not going to go there. But I just wanted to really highlight that it's almost Jesus' manifesto, and it starts by giving us weird things that Jesus says, but you know what, you can be happy in that, you can be blessed in that. Happy is the man. You know, as the psalm starts, even the whole of Psalms, at the beginning of worship, starts with that same idea. Happy is the man who doesn't walk in the way of the ungodly, the one that walks with the Lord. So actually, happiness should be a hallmark of our faith. And it should be a bit of a litmus test of whether we're doing our faith right, if I can put it that way. And if we are, then actually it's very good for us. And the interesting thing is, sorry, I'm going off on a total tangent to the slides, but I remember years and years back in London, I was working a lot with demographic work for evangelistic sake. And Christians from different spheres used to send me some of their research work. And I got sent a rather nattily named, I won't be able to say it properly, to do with, it's a study in the morbidity and or something or other. Basically, the conclusion of this piece of statistical research that was done in the NHS showed that if you were involved in an act of worship once a week, you cost the state a lot less in terms of your health. So it wasn't what you now there believed, it's what you acted on. That was one of the things I took out of it. It wasn't those who said, oh, I'm a Christian or I'm a Muslim, but both Christians and Muslims who actively participated in their faith, if you can put it that way, actually were getting benefits out of it that meant they cost the NHS less. You see, things like reports like that are important for people who are planning, see, so they do it. It never makes headlines in the newspaper. It's just useful to kind of see. So there are things that God has actually laid out for us in our faith and our scripture. And you say, oh, well, I've just mentioned you could be a Muslim. Well, of course, Islam in many ways inherited a huge amount of its format from its Christian foundations. So anyway, let's stay on target, shall we? Quick question, which you can you can contribute to if you like. It's just that question: how many kinds of happiness are there? Because as we're going to see, not all happiness is necessarily good for you, but some is. So, any thoughts on that? Anyone like to give me some guesses? Actually, this is the thing where somebody might be shouting at their screen right now. I know the answer. It's 42, but I can't hear you. Okay, don't worry too much then. I'll come up with a few ideas. Aristotle suggested two kinds of happiness. The Bible, I put 3+ because depending on what you want to look for in terms of happiness, you can find actually the Bible talks about multiple different threads in happiness. We'll think about that in a second. You often find in kind of modern psychology, and this guy over here in the corner of the screen, the guy called Martin Seligman, who is he's often referred to as the founder of the positive psychology movement. Positive psychology emerged out of US studies and out of his work, and the logic was very clear. Up until that point, psychology had been focused on what goes wrong, and he said we need to turn the whole thing around and look at what works, what's good.
What's IV?
And as such, as the founder of the modern psychology movement, he suggests 3. But you could actually count lots of different ways. But actually, it's helpful as we start to try and work out in what way is happiness good for us and what kind of happiness is work for us, to think about some of these things. So basic answers. I put the 3+ because you can look at happiness in multiple ways. You could say 8 from Jesus' Beatitudes, couldn't you? But at a fundamental level, I find Scripture addresses satisfaction of the body, satisfaction of the soul, and satisfaction of the spirit. So there's a kind of if you like, there are different levels at which happiness can hit you. Martin Seligman, the way he splits it out, he says there's pleasure, which kind of equates a little bit with the body, if you think about it. And then there's passion, the things that I really get excited and passionate about, and there's purpose.
Okay.
Actually, all of those are components of happiness. They're different layers and levels. You go back to Aristotle, he just broke things into 2, what he referred to as hedonia and eudaimonia. We'll think about in a second. I just want to kind of come back to that threefold bit though on the side. See, when my body is satisfied, I do call it pleasure, which is what Martin Seligman is talking about. When my soul or my emotions are being satisfied, it's normally because I'm satisfying my passions. What things do you get passionate about? And when those things are being satisfied, I kind of know, and we might call the body being satisfied. I've just had a good meal or whatever. My senses are being satisfied, the sense of touch. So that can be, those things are pleasurable. As it pushes more into the emotions and the soulish area, we might use the word happiness in church, specifically there. And then purpose, very often in scriptural sense, you find words like righteousness, joy, and peace. The reason I mention that is if you break down some of the work that's done on purpose, you find that purpose emerges from those ideas, a sense of having done things the right way. That's righteousness. Did it the right way. Joy at a really deep level, kind of a different level, even from it's not even to do with kind of that satisfying my passions, and peace, shalom. You find those kind of ideas are wrapped into there. So you find a kind of that mix between the way that modern thinking is trying to group these kind of wide range of experiences, which we call happiness, and understand the threads and layers. But if you go back to Aristotle's very simple approach, we find it's really helpful, because actually what we discover is it kind of creates a real marker that is increasingly being brought out in proper scientific papers as being one of the markers between the kind of happiness that's really, really good for you and the one that's a bit indifferent. And to kind of put it in a nutshell, his first level, hedonia, you need a bit of it to be good for you. If you're not being satisfied at all, you're probably starving to death, if you can put it that way, if your body's not being satisfied. And we'll think about that as we move on. So he draws these 2 distinctions, 2 types of happiness, what he calls hedonic happiness or eudaimonic happiness, hedonia or eudaimonia. And if anyone watched any of my the video blogs I used to do while I was walking my dogs during the summer, I talked about this a little bit in those sessions. Hedonia, as in the word hedonism, is about satisfying the senses. It's about the pleasurable experiences. It's having the pleasant life. Eudaimonia, you kind of can see that the demonia bit, or the demonic bit, is like it sounds. You know, the word demonic means spiritual. We think of demons, they're spirits. We think of them as bad ones, but the word itself in Greek is just the word for a spirit. And you means good, you know. So there's kind of good spirited happiness. So even Aristotle was recognizing that there's a kind of a spirit that's good for the, there's a happiness that's good for the spirit, good for the soul, good for the spirit. So that was his basic distinctions. One of his quotes, you kind of give you a bit of a sense between the two. He says, it's not one swallow or a fine day that makes a spring. And so it's not one day or a short time that makes a man blessed and happy. And one of the things there to draw out is there's something about happiness that's good for the soul that's more than just instantaneous. It's very often you can find it can revolve around instant moments, but something about the way we process them, something about the way we address them makes them transcend just the momentary. And I want us to kind of get hold of that, because it's about the importance. It starts to bring into play the importance of sort of self-reflection. The self-reflection allows a certain quality to come out of an instant moment and kind of stretch itself and push itself more into our sense of the story of who we are. And I'm going to leave that one hanging for a bit. It's a really key one when we want to start to change our underlying emotional sense. The way you actually do it is by actually that reflective process that takes certain moments and gives them more space within our sense of the story we have of ourselves. I'll give you that kind of as a free thing up front. So, hedonic is the pleasant life. Eudaimonic is the good life. So I've got some questions. What's the difference between the two? And we started from in the world of psychology. They started to really identify the difference back in about 2007 with some work that was done, and that work's been summed up into 4 simple questions. So I'm going to ask you to keep a tally of the answers to these 4 questions, okay, as we go through this. So the way you're going to score yourself, I'm going to put the questions up on the screen. And you're going to say to yourself, if that's never true of me, I give myself 1. You know, if it's true all of the time, I give myself 6. So you're self-scoring. Is that okay? And then I'm going to kind of explain to you the meaning of these when we get there. So you ready? Okay. So over the last few months, let's give it a context. How often did you feel happy? So how often did you feel happy in the last few months? It's not a precise time. It's about trying to get your focus on the thing that matters to you. How often did you feel happy? Give yourself a score between 1 for never, 6 for the whole time. How often did you feel a sense of direction or meaning? 1 for never, 6 for all of the time. How often did you feel satisfied? And finally, again, 1 to 6, how often do you feel that you had something worthwhile to contribute? Now, you look at these 4 questions, you say, that's ridiculous. You can't say anything about me from 4 questions. And the way these things are worked out is originally there would be surveys with like 80 questions on them, you know. And what they discovered is that these 4 questions kind of predict roughly the same answer about 95% of the time as if you took 80 questions. But the truth is most people won't answer 80 questions, but they will answer 4. So what does it tell us? What does it tell us? Well, what I want you to do is you're going to add up the pink questions, and I want you to add up your score for the blue questions. So you now reduce from 4 numbers just to 2 numbers. So add up the scores to questions 1 and 3, okay? And anyone like to tell me what their scores were? Anyone like to volunteer that?
I was comparing mine with Emma, but I won't tell you Emma's because I'll get in trouble. I got 7 and 7 for the two.
7 and 7. Okay. Anyone else like to contribute? Anyone else? We all should get pretty high scores here. So you got 7 and 7 for the two answers.
I got 6 and 6.
No, but hang on, you're only supposed to answer out of 6. 1 to 6. You mean when you added the two together?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
combined ones. Yeah,
When
sorry.
you added the two together, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
So did anyone get 8 or more?
I did.
I did.
Jane? Oh, we had a few people.
Oh, that was wrong.
Debbie?
Yeah, that was wrong.
Yeah, I was.
Got some mates here, yeah.
Almost always in a church group, you'll always find there's a good number of folks. Over 8.
Sorry, I gave you a wrong one there. Yeah. What was it? I got
But don't worry, we don't want to
6
make
and 5 is 11, and 6 and 4, 10.
Yeah, because everyone here who's giving me scores that actually put you into the way above average in terms of your happiness, which
Oh,
should
this is
surprise
cool.
you in church, should it? Just being really blunt. In a church, we would hope that people are generally a bit happier than in the general population, wouldn't you? And actually, in churches, you always get a large number of folks who hit 8+, which technically puts them in the top 5% of all people in the world in terms of happiness. But it's a particular kind of happiness. It's the hedonic happiness. It's the instant kind of measurable, probably dopamine driven sense of pleasure. Not exclusively, but it's that kind of, there it is. So I said, that means you're the kind of party animal, perhaps. Now, nothing wrong with it, because actually it can be the way in which we build some of the bigger sense of happiness. But as we're going to see, some interesting things came out of this work. Let's think about the second question now. So if you add it up, so that's your pleasure. Most of you in Hope Church, it's it's really important to get this. You have a more pleasant life than the average person in the UK. And it's really important to acknowledge that. Do you know, it's very trendy to rubbish our lives. But the funny thing is, it's because we rubbish our lives, we often don't get the other kind of happiness. In terms of the foods we eat, the experiences we're able to have, the freedoms we have, those kinds of things, we should be able to satisfy that pleasant life criteria. That doesn't mean to say there aren't moments of real severe sadness, but those are moments that sit within a bigger picture. Is that making sense? So that's nice, and it's something to thank the Lord for. Now add up your scores for the blue questions, 2 and 4. And as we heard from Phil, this time, if you got a score of 7+, anyone get 7 or more? So yeah. Phil got 7, Debbie and Manny up. And again, in churches, there's a huge number of 57s. And that shouldn't surprise us again, because actually to score 7+, you're in the top 5% of people in the Western world in terms of your sense of meaning and purpose, happiness. Mm-hmm. Happiness that has purpose to it. Does that make sense? And so in actual fact, churches are even more biased and more skewed to developing high scores in this, because of course we are in a context where we believe that life does have a purpose. It's easier to have a sense of personal purpose if you think that life generally has a purpose. So in actual fact, that's a very positive thing now. So that they refer to as the good life. That simple survey is summarizing some work that were done by these couple of guys, Barbara Fredrickson and Stephen Cole, North Carolina and UCLA. And actually what they discovered in their work is it was one of the first kind of evidences, properly scientifically tested, of Aristotle's concept of eudaimonic happiness. Eudaimonic happiness, but equally one of the things they found, there was a clear correlation between eudaimonic happiness and immune health. Okay, so it's not hedonic happiness that actually produces good physical health, and also it turns out emotional health. This is one of the first ones that they discovered. It's meaningful happiness. It's happiness that has a purpose to it. It's eudaimonic happiness. It's happiness that somehow has transcended the moment and has become part of your story. So I'm trying to kind of spell it out, kind of so you go, oh yeah, I get that. See, if I walk down the road tomorrow and I find £20 on the pavement, now I know someone will probably say, you're legally obliged to hand that into the police. I have to confess, if I find a £20 note, it's not something I'm going to do because, you know, if I found 1 million, I probably would. Yeah, maybe. The thing is,
depending on
it feels great in the moment. Okay, if over the next week.
Sorry, Chris, just sorry to interrupt. Just checking everyone's muted again because I can hear a little bit of background stuff going on. It's hard to, yeah, thanks.
No, but yeah, no worries. Don't worry, you're not putting me off. You know, you know, if I find the £20, it's great for the moment. If over the next week I tell 20 people about how blessed I am, and actually, you know, I'm the kind of person that God blesses in those ways, and I make it part of my story, I've actually stretched its kind of sense of happiness and its purpose and meaning because it's somehow intrinsic to something about me. Does that make sense? Now, I might be deluded, but by doing that, I'm actually turning it into something that's much more about my blessing, if I can put it that way. And that's the kind of happiness that starts to become really good for our physical immune health. So, in fact, what they would say is it's actually, this was right at the beginning when he said this, and the research has shown it more and more. So right in their early research, they were able to say that it's at least as important to your physical health as smoking or overeating, you know. So we all know about the problems of overeating and obesity in the West, and smoking, of course. But actually, having a higher eudaimonia score is at least as significant, if not more. It's just, you know, how do you measure those things? In other words, people who have developed a longer scale sense of the goodness of their lives and that their life is a good life compared to just, if you like, I had a pleasant experience. That's really important. And so it becomes a bit of a cyclic feedback, doesn't it? You know, if you're always moaning, sorry, I don't want to be cruel to anyone, but if we're always going on about how bad everything is and how unfortunate we are, we're actually making ourselves more susceptible to more colds and more illnesses and more whatever. Now, I'm not making the statement that those things are because you're like that. That's not what I'm saying. What we're saying is, whatever life is going to throw at us, we will handle better if we can maintain a sense of happiness that stretches out and fills up the spaces of our sense of who we are. Is that making sense? And that's really quite biblical, isn't it, when you stop and think about it, as they were starting to find it. And what they found, what's interesting, I should say, is Barbara Fredrickson said when she started the research, she expected it to be the other way around. She expected that people who had an easy life, okay, an easy life, the pleasant life, would be generally physically healthier. That's what she was looking for. He went out to look for that and found it was totally incorrect. It was actually a byproduct of that research that they started to realize there was a type of happiness, so they researched it further, that some people have that is good for their physical health and also, it turns out, mental health and so on. So not all happiness is the same. Eudaimonia, or meaningful happiness, actually requires something from us. There are things we can put in place, and as we can see that the community can start to put in place for us as well, which is why I think Christians so often skew. You know, we look after both body and soul. Nobody goes hungry in our own churches. Not only do they not go hungry in our own churches, but churches have often started up the food banks. So they're actually providing hedonic happiness for members and people around them. But more than that, they're also helping provide that stretch meaning of the importance and the value of a life that allows them to stretch a moment and go, isn't life good? Isn't that fantastic? You kind of get the feel? So this lady, because I do some of this kind of secular areas of coaching, we did a lot of work with Get Berkshire Active, which is the sports funding body for Berkshire where I live. So every county has a sports funding body. And I got invited to their award because we helped develop some of their coaches and teach them how to coach better. We got invited to their awards dinner, and I sat next to this lady, and I was talking to her. She turned out she was going to be she was the guest of honor to speak that year, and she had actually been a winner of the award the year before. And 2 days before she went to pick up awards, so she was the road cyclist ladies Zwift champion in 2016. So she won the Get Berkshire Active 2018 Sports Personality of the Year award. 2 days before she went to collect her award, she suffered a massive hemorrhagic stroke. Absolutely massive. So you can tell from the picture, this is a more current one, it blinded her partially. She's partially blind now, and it impaired some of her other movements and so on. And as she stood up, I sat and I talked to her about her experience. And obviously, as some of you know, I've had a stroke. I had a couple of strokes, so we talked and compared experience. And then she stood up. While she was speaking, she made this statement. She said, "Well, it's hard to believe. I'm truly happier today than I was before the stroke." So when she sat down, I wrote that down. When she sat down, I said, "Can I have permission to use that when I'm coaching and teaching?" She said, "Yes." So I took the photo of her. But what she described is something that has actually been shown and demonstrated time and time again around the world, which is actually, if you, okay, I've not got it on here, but probably got it in the wrong order. This is actually, you find it in this guy's book, Stumbling on Happiness, but it's been shown time and time again around the world. If tomorrow were in an accident and were left partially paralyzed, which of course is exactly what happened to Rachel, the lady we just looked at. It's exactly what happened to her. She wasn't in an accident, but she had a stroke, was left partially paralyzed. If you're left partially paralyzed after an accident, or alternatively, if the next day you won the national lottery, in a year's time, you will be no happier. You're likely to be happier if you had the stroke than you would be if you won the lottery. Okay, they will sometimes qualify it and say at least as happy, okay, as if you won the lottery. I mean, the thing with the lottery is almost every time a country brings in a lottery, about 2 to 4 years after they've brought in a lottery, they do a program on how it's ruined people's lives. So there's American documentaries, there are Australian documentaries, there are British documentaries, loads of them. But generally, it's not just even those great disasters that happen, because they do, because it's just one of the things that happens. But actually, the problem is that the kind of happiness that comes from winning the lottery, actually in your body is an instant reward process. And the problem with that process is that kind of happiness creates a tolerance. And it raises the benchmark. So when you have a massive, if all of your happiness is predicated on one exceptional experience, that one exceptionally happy experience has lifted your threshold so you don't feel things so happily the next day. If I'm walking down the road the next day and I find £20, I find no pleasure in it whatsoever. Can you see why? I won't have time tonight to explain it, but you can actually show it in the dopamine circuits, how they become saturated, and you need more of it the next time to get a similar level of happiness. And so as a result, people who have gone through these extreme experiences of a happy moment are often find that they can never be as happy again. On the other hand, very often those who go through tragedies actually have to learn something, which is about the process which this guy writes about, Dan Gilbert, which is he contrasts natural with synthetic happiness. So natural happiness is when you get what you wanted. Okay, it's the kind of thing that makes a pleasant life. Oh, thinking there's a moment. No, I'll waste time and it would take too much explaining. But it's that kind of oh, I really wanted an E-type Jag, and I'm so rich I went out and bought one. Well, that you get what you wanted. That's a pleasant life. Okay, that's natural happiness. Synthetic happiness is happiness you have to make for yourself. Now, don't be fooled by the fact he uses the word synthetic to say it's not real. Because actually he demonstrates in his work, it's a far more powerful type of happiness. And it's the kind of happiness in the process of doing it for yourself, you're actually very often doing exactly that process of we're taking the moment and you're making them part of a sense of the whole of you. You're stretching them to fill up the whole of who you are. Does that make sense? And it's that process actually doesn't dull. It's not like an addiction to a drug that, once you've had a bit, you have to have more the next time. Actually, it becomes a kind of much more solid foundation. So he makes a distinction between natural and synthetic happiness. And so synthetic happiness is what you learn to make when you don't get what you wanted. Which is, ironically, you can understand that in the context of when Jesus says, happy are the poor in spirit. Why? Because actually God has made the world where there is an opportunity in the things that go wrong to actually discover more of the kind of happiness that produces better well-being. Okay, now, I'm not saying that therefore we should all go through bad experiences. There can be an overkill, but in the flow of life, when certain discomforts and things go wrong, very often they open up an opportunity for us to learn some skills and to force us to kind of get practiced in stuff that mean, like Rachel Elliott, we can say, I'm happier today than I would have been if I'd not gone through that experience. So just kind of sketching these things down, putting them together. You've got the hedonic, the pleasant life, you've got the eudaimonic, the good life. And as we can, is how we observe and we interpret at those levels, how we learn to process those things and internalize them, that kind of makes the difference. So hedonic happiness happens. Eudaimonic is something we have to construct, which means we have to therefore go through a positive observing and interpreting to kind of build them into us. Does that make sense? And actually that's a key part of kind of the things, you know, like Paul says, you know, whatever is good, whatever is pure, think on those things, you know, count our blessings. Okay, stop and remember the things that have gone well for you. In all things, give thanks, because we're going to see that thanks and gratitude is one of the ways we actually learn to build eudaimonic happiness. So if you're looking at the screen, see that little word popping up, what do you see when you look at it? You see both possibilities, can't you? You can see, but you see both defeat and you see victory. And on the whole, victory is much more dominant, but you know, you look a bit carefully, you can see defeat in the thing as well. And actually that is the truth of almost all life. And I don't mean that trivially. Almost every situation, we have a bit of a choice as to how we see it, how we frame it. And next time when we meet in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to look a lot more about how we put the disciplines in place to build a much more appreciated sense, which is actually going to be good for you. It benefits your health, your mental well-being, your relational well-being, all of those things. There are disciplines that we can actually put in place that help do this. And they're often around learning and teaching ourselves to frame things correctly. But we will all have a certain instinct. We get drawn to something. Is it victory or is it defeat? And we've always got the option. So priming the pump. Now this one, there's a little bit of audio. You'll notice the color has changed. Technically this belongs in session 2, so I've got a different color. But when I looked at it, I had about 3 times as many slides in session 2 as I did in session 1. So I've pulled these into session 1. I'm going to show you what I mean by priming the pump. Okay, so in a moment, okay, the screen is going to display in 2 halves. So I want you now to decide whether you're going to focus on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. You do it as individuals. Just make the mental decision in your own mind. You're looking at your screen. The screen is going to go into 2 halves. You choose whether you're going to look at the right or the left-hand side. Okay, just stick with it like that. And then something's going to happen while you're focusing on that side of the screen. And I just want you to feed back, and you have to turn your things back on to tell me what you heard. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to focus on one side of the screen or the other, whichever one you've chosen, and I'm going to ask you to listen for a word in some sound. Okay, did everyone hear that? Mm-hmm. Who heard, you can do it just by raising it, who heard the word they were looking at? Okay, so of those who heard the word they were looking at, who heard the word brainstorm? Okay, who heard the word green needle? Okay, what I want you to notice is people heard the word they were looking at, didn't they? Okay, look at the other word. Now look at the other side of the screen. Choose the other side of the screen, look at the other side of the screen. And we'll go again. Okay, so hang on. So looking at the other side of the screen. Did you hear the other word?
Mm-hmm.
Who heard the other word when you looked at the other side of the screen? Okay, let's try again. Flick on the other side. Choose a side again quickly. Okay. Do you notice it changing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's so freaky, isn't it? It's
It
so
is.
freaky.
You actually, the part of the reason I want to do it is actually people have that. Well, that was odd. I genuinely heard it's actually exactly the same audio both times.
Know what you're looking at.
I want to show you again another one like this. Okay, we'll just move on to another. So, okay, so watch and listen carefully. Okay, watch and listen carefully.
Listen and try to understand what she says. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. What did she say?
Answers?
4, 4, 4.
4, 4. Okay. Watch and listen again.
What do you hear now? 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4.
Ah.
Okay, what did you hear then?
Paw.
Paw or bore? Bore or paw
Paw.
tends to be what people hear. Okay, now just to freak you out a little bit, Phil. Okay, so what's going on?
As crazy as it may seem, what you hear depends on which of the two videos you see. Watch both videos in turns now and listen how the sound changes. 4, 4, 4.
Watch between the two screens.
4,
Watch how the word
4,
changes.
4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4.
Did you get that experience? Look at the different mouths. You heard it differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what I'm wanting to demonstrate now, we'll do a bit more of this next week. Can you see how the way you're thinking is affecting how you're perceiving the world? Now, one of the things that I want to say is people get a bit freaked out and they get a bit nihilistic about this. Oh, anything could be anything. It's all so confusing. You can't be absolutely anything. It has to kind of fit within certain parameters. But you can see things and hear things even very, very differently, depending on what your brain is expecting. And it's the way that mental magicians kind of work by priming, as they call it. They've got all these clever tricks that kind of set the people's brains up in certain ways that allows them to use exactly the same answer, and the person feels it's the one that they thought it was going to be. So the thing I just wanted to get out of this is there is something about how and the way we think about life and the way we perceive life that actually changes the quality of what we get from it. And in all seriousness, because I've been doing it for a while, I've now got hours and hours worth of tests and things like this that you can play around with to kind of help people see how it's not that the world is totally nothing to do with what you expect, but as we're learning, the way you think actually stretches your sense of what the moment is. Some of it is actually you're actually experiencing what you expect to experience in a few minutes' time, and you're also there are things from a few minutes ago that are part of your thinking at the present time. So our sense of the moment, it's actually kind of a bit more of a bubble of time, and it's something about this bubble of time, if you can put it this way, that we stretch our sense of good. This is a good life. This is a happy life, and it's good for us when we have that. And so you can see if you get into a very negative mindset, you will see and hear, you'll even hear people say things they don't say. I can put it that way. That a negative mindset is a tragedy. Now, you don't ever want to have none. You don't want to have none of it, but it needs to be in proportion. There are survey after survey that show you need a little bit of the negative as a kind of a counterbalance, but it's not kind of 50-50 by any means. It's kind of it has its place to kind of anchor the positive, so you don't become naive. But actually, we want to kind of, if we have an expectation for the good, we're much more likely to experience it. It kind of cycles up. And he who has is more given. So we expect it a little bit, and actually we then get experiences that mean we expect it more, and it cycles up. As we start to turn our perspective around the other way, he who hasn't, even what he has, gets taken away. Put it in Jesus' words. Does that make sense? Because actually, the things going on around us in the flow of moments more and more start to reinforce what we've already bringing mentally to the mix. So that one with the mouth movements, they refer to as the McGurk effect. If anyone's interested in those things. So putting these things together, I'm not doing too badly. We're hitting about the hour, so I'm feeling quite smug at the moment because I can quite happily talk for much longer. We didn't start at 7:30. We chatted for a good 10 minutes. So, Jesus talks about he comes to give us life in all its fullness. So, I kind of mix those things, you're hedonic and eudaimonic. We are, if you see someone hungry, we feed them. We see them thirsty, we give them water. Actually, the Christian life is not all about denial of pleasure, but sometimes if you never have denied pleasure, you never learn to build the other kind of happiness. So there are times when we do deny it. Does that make sense? You kind of put, so Jesus come to give you life in all its fullness. As Paul puts it, yeah, nothing's fully forbidden, but it's not all helpful. So we learn to balance it and put those things together. It's made up of pleasure, which we can think of as bodily satisfaction, but it's made up of using our skills and letting our passions have their framework and so on. It's finding our purpose. But very, very key is this thing of natural and synthetic, which is that the synthetic is actually part of how we bring our mindset to play. And we can actually use that to kind of put disciplines in place and habits in place that will actually fundamentally make you happier. And the kind of baseline of the research at the moment is this. That it's not true that you can't change whether you feel happy or sad. You can't just decide in the moment, if you've just gone through a tragedy, you can't just turn it on. But actually, there are things you can do that change your baseline of happiness. Now, some people are fortunate, they're born with a higher baseline. But whatever baseline you're born with, every one of us can do certain things, and we've started to learn what those are, that actually raise our sense and layer of happiness. And ironically, non-Christian or atheistic atheistic psychologists who are beginning to realize how well-being works, recognizing that there will always be a place for spirituality in a healthy human heart. So they won't deny it anymore. They say actually it's unhelpful to try and deny that. Why? Because a lot of the things that we think of in terms of spiritual life are actually some of the things that actually are the exercises that they've learned actually increase underlying happiness. See? So the observe and interpret layer. So got the quote, you should have life in all of its fullness. So I'm just going to leave some basic practices at the end of this session. And you can think of this as how Jesus teaches them, and so on. But these are all been proven to actually be things that help you build that basic level of the skills of synthetic happiness, which means I can take a moment, and even a tough moment, you can reinterpret in a ways that it makes progress to something. By what I mean is, if you take a physical analogy, if I decided I was going to run the London Marathon next year, that would make me laugh hilariously, and that would be good for me. but if I decide I'm going to do it, and I go out to try and run 26 miles tomorrow and I fail, the fact that I've got a purpose, I've got an end in sight, means it's not really a failure, because actually I've got moving. Does that make sense? So the more we develop these things, what you find is even when the obstacles come and the knockbacks come, they become part of the story of how we're moving forward. And so they become things that even they can make us happy. And like Rachel Elliott will now say of her life, she used to be women's world Swift champion, now she's blind. She still cycles on the machine, but she just can't see where she's going anymore, but actually she'll say it's retaught her how to appreciate almost every moment of life. As you talk to people who are going through lockdown, this is a genuine strains. Absolutely, let's not kid ourselves. I found myself finding it far harder to get engaged with stuff as life is shut down, because that's a natural part of the psychology of things. But part of what's kept me going in many ways are some of these other habits. So we can't change sometimes the circumstance around us, but we can change what we're able to respond to it. And actually we can respond in ways that mean we will do better than others will. And we can pass those skills on to others that need to hear them. So these are some of the things you can reframe the key moments of life, of your life story, and start sharing it and telling it. So that's that thing of perspective, of putting it into a bigger picture. If I stub my toe, okay, that's a pretty unpleasant experience. You know, if I stub my toe, let's make it really trivial. If I stub my toe, and you can tell that this has actually happened to me. If I stub my toe going down in the dark to make my wife a cup of coffee, with a frothy top, which she likes me when I do it that way in the morning. I stub my toe, and then when she says to me, "Oh, I really love you. Thank you very much for doing those things," actually, stubbing my toe was a part of why she really loves me. You see how I'm reframing the experience? That makes sense? It's a really trivial example, that, but actually even stubbing my toe is part of actually what I'm suffering on behalf of serving someone else, and actually I'm getting a response from that benefits me. I framed it, and as I tell those stories, telling the story actually is a key part of locking it into who you are. The words that you use, which is what you saw with the brainstorm and green needle, the words that are going through your head are actually shaping the way you're experiencing things. See, and the more that you say those things and say they're true about yourself, the more they become part of your memory of those things. And so it becomes a positive experience. So reframing moments that maybe don't seem to have much pleasure or happiness in them, but in part of a story that's going somewhere, is a key kind of habit. Practicing gratitude at the end of each day as it happens. I do online kind of coaching still with folks, and I'm taking a lady who's gone through some quite tough things this last year with death of parents, to both parents and other things, and loss of job. And I talked to her today. She's starting a new business up. So she's got very little to say about the development of the business, but she said, you know, I've been, and because she's been very worried, because then after losing two parents, her sister's going through tests for quite a serious illness. And she said, Mia, but at the end of the day, I'm doing that practice where I'm listening through before I go to bed. She said, and actually in all of the midst, she said, I know I'm doing far better than I did when these other elements happened. So it's not taking away the fact that she's still going through some tough times, but actually this practice of being grateful at the end of the day is one of the best tested. It actually has been shown to lift your mood more than the best mood lifting drugs that are given to depressants. And so what modern psychology will say is don't necessarily stop taking the drugs, because it's a totally different process, but add this to if you're taking these drugs to lift your depression, get into the practice of being grateful at the end of the day. Of course, the thing about being grateful is, who are you grateful to?
Oh.
You know, and like Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, that looks to you to appeal to a higher power, they won't say who that is, but actually it doesn't take a huge leap of faith to work out where that gratitude's going. You know, and why it is taught to be grateful in life. So gratitude is actually being shown to lift your mood and your general level of happiness in the kind of way that is good for your mental and physical health. So we get into that practice. Now, I say it into a group like this, and I'm preaching to the choir, because a lot of people say, well, that's what I do at the end of the day anyway. But sometimes we don't, do we? I'm just giving you another reason why it's good for you. Yeah. And the end of the day bit is just helpful, because it's like thinking before you go to bed. You could do it in the middle of the day as well. Be grateful during the day, but particularly as you go to bed, it shapes the things that you go to bed thinking about, you see. And which also will shape the things you think about when you wake up the next morning as well. Investing yourself into something. Okay, so actually new projects within church. Investing yourself means it costs you time and money. Okay, it's not just kind of casual participation. Investing is proper, because actually what you find is you invest yourself into things, you draw a sense of meaning from them, which you don't get when they're handed to you on a plate. So actually sometimes, and this was a tough one for me to learn, because growing up in a Christian home, you know, we always used to live on hand-me-downs and gifts. So I'm saying that laughing now. I shouldn't laugh, because some of you know my parents. But I do laugh because I look back at some of those experiences, and it produced terrible attitudes in me, snobby attitudes about when people had more than they should have, or in my mind, all those other things. But also it meant actually I didn't often invest into things, because we were always the people who received stuff rather than gave stuff. Does that make sense? But actually I've learned sometimes it's really important that actually I spend money on my hobbies, not just do the ones that are cheap. It's a strange kind of thing, and you'll have to find out for yourself, but actually investing into certain things, what we tend to find is we get more back from them. And all of these different ideas, as you put them into practice, are lifting your base layers of happiness. So make a list of good things that could happen out of something bad. That's, again, it's a bit like reframing it. If we'd had time to break into small groups tonight, we're running out of time now. I often get people to think, tell an experience and try and challenge with each other. Here's an experience that I really didn't like over the last couple of weeks. How could something good come out of this? What could that, so in the last week, this happened that didn't make me very happy. And then the other to ask the question, well, let's think of ways, what good things could come out of this? You know, that kind of practice, these are the kinds of disciplines. And as you'll notice and think, actually, these are the kind of things that happen because I'm in church very often. Sometimes deliberately, and just because sometimes we've got irritating Christian friends that say things like that. But actually, they are part of the processes that actually help us develop those internal mindsets that begin to start to see the world, and that lifts our mood. Try to laugh at something bad that's happened to you. I do this all the time. It's become one of my terrible habits. I can even laugh at the fact I do it, because when you physically laugh, you give yourself a shot of morphine. There you go. There's a win for you. Free, natural, healthy morphine is injected into your brain when you laugh physically. Okay, not when you smile wryly and go, oh, that's a bit funny, but when you physically laugh, the shaking in your body, I'll do some more of this next week. The shaking in your body, you know, could potentially be dangerous. You know, if you're in a crash and it shakes your body up, see, and so because you might get physical pain, your brain goes, whoa, but you're shaky inside, I better give you some endorphin, because endorphin helps with pain. And endorphin is where we get the name morphine from, because morphine is just fake outside endorphin. So we actually produce a little injection of morphine, but because we're only laughing, we stop after a couple of seconds, and we don't need the painkiller. So all we get is the euphoric high. we get the nice bit without the having to deal with any pain, you see. So if you try and laugh at those bad things, it's really good for you. It's actually really good for you. And telling someone something you appreciate about them, that's a really good one. Again, to try and explain all of the reasons why these work, because we'll actually see we get an awful lot. If you're going to develop a sense of meaning, you'll almost always develop it within a community of people. Okay. You find it comes, and actually, therefore, the way we connect to people actually increases our ability to draw that sense of meaning and purpose out of the relationships we have. So when you appreciate things about people, it's often because you're saying, this is where we connect on how things work. So I've just made these really simple little list of kind of habits of the types of things that make for a happier people. Or, you know, thinking of something that you're looking forward to and spending time meditating on it. You actually get more benefit from the thing you're hoping for while you're hoping for it than when it happens. And to the degree that secular-minded psychologists now talk about, that's the benefit of waiting for sex until you are married. That's a total quote from maybe not verbatim, but a line from a book I read by a psychologist, saying this perhaps explains why people get more satisfaction out of waiting for their sexual relationships in marriage than rushing into it on the first night they meet. Because actually you get more benefit from the dopaminergic system in your brain when you're looking forward to something that's coming than when you actually get it. So hope is very, very powerful for happiness, more powerful than actually the reward. The reward's nice, but it lasts a moment, whereas the hope lasts a long period, you see, and gets written into that sense of who we are. Enhancing your environment with pictures of loved ones and pets. You think about that little exercise we did, the things you see around you are shaping what you're expecting to see. So actually, it's actually sensible to put people you love up on your wall. You know, you can say, oh no, but I'm all arty, you know, I'm all arty and minimalistic. That's lovely for your sense of aesthetic, but actually, do you know what, to have a really gaudy kind of family photo is probably good for your mental health. You know, I used to know, sorry, so I've been not saying in case you ever meet them, but I'm going to now. So, but people, when we first moved out of London to where we are, we met people who have these enormous kind of oil painting sized pictures of their family lying in a photographer's studio with kind of trendy lights behind them. they're ever so cheesy, but now I know better. I understand that they're actually probably kind of good for their mental health. And then, practicing conscious acts of kindness. That's important. The flow of words there, conscious. You get more benefit if you say to yourself that today I'm going to do something. Today, when I go to the shops, I'm going to buy something for the person in front of me. That kind of thing. You get more benefit in terms of the hormones that are good for your body if you plan to do it and then do it, than if you're just standing in a queue and you think, I'm just going to do it in the moment. So actually planning kind acts and then fulfilling them is far better for you than just doing them in the moment. Okay, so I haven't got the time to fully explain all of the whys, but these are the kinds of things that are being discovered. And as we looked at the beginning, that's why we want to lift our happiness. That's not somehow because what Jesus has given us is not enough. It's actually recognizing that a huge amount of what Jesus is giving us into a world that didn't have the benefits we have of understanding, what adrenocortical, hormones are, but actually those are the reason why it works. But actually Jesus said, well, why don't you do these things? And what we're finding is that those kind of practices that we often find associated with church life, but very easy in a cynical world, something that's going on a bit pointless, isn't it? Actually, they are good. They are good. So that's our time. I've maybe taken a few minutes over the hour. Does anyone want to ask anything or state anything or clarify anything? Or while I'm waiting for you to think about that, I'll stop recording so you won't get recorded.